There are various techniques to improve speaking skills. For example, the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. This is terrible advice. For this episode, we have something kind of interesting that was suggested by the third founder, Yoshio Goto. He said, why don't you ask GPT-4 what tips it would give a person struggling with speaking, and then talk about the advice that AI gives you and what you think about it. So I'm just going to go ahead and record a prompt here live, and let's see where it takes us.
Perfect.
Here we go.
Exciting.
Hey, GPT-4. I'm a new manager at an up-and-coming company. I'm smart. I'm hardworking. I'm good at what I do. But I think one of the things that's holding me back the most are my communication skills. I struggle to be concise. I ramble. Sometimes I use a little too many filler words. But more importantly, I feel like I'm underperforming. For example, I'll finish speaking, and only once I'm finished do all of the good ideas come to mind, which is very frustrating. I tend to lose my ability to think on the spot. And I also tend to lose sleep and really stress when I have prepared presentations. So with all of that in mind, what are your top 5 tips for me if I want to take on a communication training project to upskill? Okay, let's see.
Wow, it's crazy that it captured all of that, and one click.
One click.
Wow.
The future is here. Certainly. Here we go. Working on communication skills is a great way to improve your leadership capabilities. Here are 5 actionable steps to help you improve. So let's start at the top. Number 1, structured communication training. Consider enrolling in a structured communication course, whether online or in person. Courses can provide theoretical foundations, practical exercises, and constructive feedback to help improve your skills. Public speaking organizations, such as Toastmasters, can also be helpful. I wish they said Toastmasters and Ultraspeaking. Wow, this is
That's cool.
It feels like we planted
It
this
feels
in
like
here.
we rigged it for sure. Can't argue with that one. That's good advice.
Well, but why is it good advice? Why is a course a good place to start?
I think people make all the difference, right? The situation you described is I struggle with a skill that requires being in front of other people. And you and I both know that the problem isn't speaking. It's not even thinking clearly. Those are the symptoms, the struggles, but underneath it, the problem tends to be deeper, around the feeling of pressure, the sensation of adrenaline, the fight or flight response that kicks in, and then all of the limiting beliefs, the self-consciousness. And so it is the scenario, being in front of people, coworkers that you care about their opinions, that's what triggers these responses. And so it makes sense that if you're going to practice these skills or apply some tips, you're going to want your practice to simulate the environment you struggle in.
Yeah, one of the things that came up for me immediately was front loading the hardest part. Because communication training, what we found in our research is that the biggest blocker is mindset. It's scary to put yourself out there. And if you're the type of person who has anxiety when it comes to communication, or struggles in the similar ways as to what I put in the prompt, then likely you are the type of person who potentially avoids situations where you have to speak, and that's only making the problem bigger. So the hardest part is finding a way to get over the hump.
Right.
And that's where a course is going to come into play. A course that has a start date, an end date, and a structured incremental layering of information is going to get you to the other side. So I think that only happens if you condense the learning, and you're going to go through the hardest part, which is turning this thing that you're avoiding to something that's not scary or not as scary anymore. And when you're in that state, the world is your oyster once more.
So hats off, GPT. That one was good.
That's a good one.
But please mention Ultraspeaking in your
should we give him a
suggestions.
grade? I think, I'd say 9 out of 10. I have to take one grade off because they suggested Toastmasters instead of Ultraspeaking.
Hurts.
Number 2, practice mindfulness and meditation.
This one's so cool.
These techniques can help reduce anxiety and improve your ability to think on the spot. They train you to stay present in the moment, manage stress, and react more calmly and thoughtfully to high-pressure situations.
I would say that is an indirect benefit, and there might be truth to it. But I think the transfer would be really difficult. Like in the moments where you are in fight or flight, how much will that meditation transfer? I think it will, but only at a later stage, not when the symptoms are overwhelming and not when you still don't have the tools to know what to do in those moments.
Maybe it'll move the needle a few percent. Like, oh, I can manage my anxiety slightly better. I feel I understand my mind slightly better. But the principle of directness or transfer of states that whatever you are practicing for has to look as close to the actual thing that you're trying to do. Your practice has to be as close to the actual performance. And in this case, meditation is going to be very difficult to transfer.
In isolation, if this was the only thing you would do, amazing, you will become a more peaceful human being, but I don't know if it will improve this scenario.
Yeah, you get better at speaking by speaking. So practice mindfulness and meditation, 1 out of 10, what would you give it?
Probably a 2.
Yeah, same. Okay, number 3, preparation and rehearsal. Before important meetings or presentations, prepare thoroughly and practice your delivery. Even rehearsing common conversations can help you get used to organizing your thoughts quickly and speaking more concisely. What would you say?
It's hard to argue the advice of preparing more or of preparing in general, because of course you want to be prepared. But I think that it can be a trap to rehearse your delivery and practice simulating conversations, because it's kind of a short-term solution. It's like cramming before a test where maybe you'll get a good response, but it's unscalable. We have a stand-up meeting, then a presentation, then a marketing update. It's just too much going on. I think the bottom line is, yes, you can prepare and you can prepare effectively, but what happens in the moments where you didn't have time to prepare?
Yeah.
You're going to feel like the floor has been taken out from underneath you.
Yeah, I think preparing is key in most situations until you get to a certain level or of trust that, I realize that with very little preparation I can do well. And that can happen actually pretty quickly. We see it in our courses where people go from being a total mess if you don't give them a lot of time to prepare to being able to give a really remarkable speech with almost no preparation or no preparation at all.
Isn't that the more interesting skill to learn?
I think it's the more interesting skill to learn. I think it's the more scalable skill to learn. I think it is the skill you will need if you want to become a leader. So I think my advice here is, yes, preparation is important. Rehearsal is very important as well, but you should do it in a way that doesn't add stress, that takes away stress.
Right. And so can improving the preparation process, minimizing it over time, be one of the goals, so that we are able to become more and more, we can free up more and more of our time to prep in lighter ways rather than having just one standard process that takes ages upon ages.
Yeah, I love that.
So what would you give this 1 out of 10?
I give it a 6.5 out of 10. It's a double-edged sword with this one. If you're the type of person with anxiety who's a perfectionist, prepare more and rehearse more is only going to make the problem worse.
Right.
Okay, what do we have here? Number 4, feedback and reflection. Regularly ask for feedback from trusted colleagues or mentors. Reflect on your communication efforts after each interaction. What went well? What could you do better next time? And this will help you identify your strengths and areas of improvement.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10.
This was the piece that I felt was missing from the first one around courses. Part of feedback is to rewire your own perception of yourself and realize, no, you come across much more confident than you give yourself credit for. No, that was more interesting than it felt internally. If you have people constantly reflecting your strengths to you, and of course your blind spots, the combination of that is a rewiring of your reality, and you start to see yourself differently, and that immediately raises your mindset, which in turn will raise the skill set.
Yeah. There's certain things you just don't see, and for most people, indeed, they come across better than they think. So what would happen if you start believing that? What would happen if you started embodying the version of you that people are seeing rather than the version of you that you're experiencing. That's where courses are magical, because you're going in an environment where everybody's working on the same thing. They're there because they feel that they're not where they need to be, and they're there because they want to grow.
Yeah.
So you being in that kind of a safe environment is going to be a game changer for your growth.
Yeah, I think getting feedback from strangers is really powerful, because you can trust it a little bit more, and there's also a little bit less self-consciousness around them because they don't really know you. It's harder to ask for feedback for people whose opinions you really care about.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
So let's only give it a 9 out of 10 because they didn't mention that. Okay, last but not least, number 5, utilize tools and techniques. There are various techniques to improve speaking skills. For example, the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. This is very funny. Can help you articulate your thoughts more clearly and concisely. Also, try to minimize filler words by pausing to gather your thoughts instead of filling the silence.
Nice.
Okay, so the pausing thing, extraordinarily valuable. Maybe one of the highest leverage things you can do in speaking. One of the hardest skill sets to apply without training.
Yes.
And particularly under pressure, particularly if you have anxiety and you're not the type of person to pause. So let's just put that aside for a second, and let's talk about
the STAR method.
The STAR method:
Let's try
situation, task, action, result. I don't know. This is terrible advice. Why is it terrible advice? Because most of your speaking is going to happen on the spot. You can't just sit down, use a framework, write it out. So if you're stressed out, you have too much happening in your brain. You have very little processing power already. So if you have to think about a framework in the moment and try to stick to it, best case scenario, you just come off as a robot and something's really off. Most likely case is you just fumble and lose yourself.
It's kind of like, I imagine GPT, if it generated a 6th answer, it might say like storytelling. Storytelling is very effective to present your ideas. Try to frame your stories using the hero's journey. And when you dig underneath that, it's like hero's journey has 9 steps and so hard to apply to any situation. This is a great example of crunchy advice that you want to believe, because it's true that great stories and movies have followed the hero's journey. But in reality, speaking is such an off-the-cuff, on-the-fly medium that we can't add to the thinking brain. We need to make it as simple as possible and take thinking out of it, and instead find ways to trigger flow state. And that's why any sort of framework that has multiple acronyms in it is kind of a ridiculous concept. -3 out of 10.
-3 out of 10. Wow. Yeah, I'd give it a 1. I mean, there are tools, just not these kinds of tools. So here's what it says at the end. Remember, improving communication skills takes time and practice. Don't be too hard on yourself if you don't see immediate results. Stay persistent and committed to your improvement, and over time you'll see progress. And in that, they're completely right. We've seen thousands of students at this point. We have never met a student who has stayed committed to learning that has not continually improved and gone through multiple breakthroughs. We've seen many completely transformational stories where people are almost unrecognizable. So overall, let's see, what did we have? Structured communication training, practice mindfulness and meditation, preparation and rehearsal, feedback and reflection, utilize tools and techniques. The only one that really had a very high grade was feedback and take a course. Yeah,
I think the bottom line is that speaking is really about learning to feel at ease being yourself. When you feel at ease being yourself, let's not forget that the real game underneath this is a feeling of belonging, a feeling of liking yourself, a feeling of being enough, a feeling of removing perfectionism from the equation. All of that underneath is very personal. It's very delicate, and maybe why ChatGPT didn't get the A+ it deserved is because this is a much more complex art than it is a frameworked science. If you want to improve your speaking, there's something underneath that has to change as well. And I think that change is really worthwhile for both your professional life, but really for just life in general.
Yeah. Getting better at speaking will improve your self-worth. There's a direct correlation between both, because if you feel very uncomfortable speaking, your self-worth might be lower than it deserves to be. Wonderful. Thank you, ChatGPT, for those answers.
Let's do this again in 1 year where it's GPT-5 or GPT-10, and imagine it's now better than us. It's like, actually, Tristan and Michael, speaking is an inner game. I can't wait.
Hopefully, when we do it again in a year, it says Ultraspeaking is the number one.
That's right. That's
Cool.
right. We can
Okay,
only wish.
let's call it. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, like, share with your friends, and
See you next time.
we'll see you next time.